Now here comes the disciple of Anandamayi Ma. He will say something. Okay.
Go forth to realize God. Try at least. This is the genuine madman. Madman means to reach the goal, signifying unlimited enlightenment. When one becomes obsessed by this madness, the madness for the world of duality takes flight. Some people are crazy over another's body. By this sort of insanity, falling prey to infatuation, one ruins one's body. Turning into a madman after God will not spoil one's body. And I'd been thinking about this because of observing different people that I know, and a lot of times it's called falling in love or whatever, but and it doesn't mean that you don't fall in love or you can't fall in love or something like that, but generally speaking, most of the relationships between, I'll just say two people now, you never know who's relating to who, but most of those relationships have to do with another person in another person's body. And so the world that we know it now is so sex-oriented that as soon as that enters the picture, people become obsessed. So, and attached and clinging to that relationship. And this is a predicament that's going on with almost everybody we know. At some time or another has had a problem being very attached to another person and translating that attachment and the sexual energy that's attached to that into I'm in love. But actually, I think if most of us really examine our histories of being in love, it didn't turn out to really be love. And when we study and progress towards the divine, which is our innate right and duty as human beings, then some of these things begin to fall off, or we have more insight into what we were doing. So like, for example, Yogananda, he was very attached to his mother. And if you read the autobiography of Yogananda, he talks about how he loved his mother so much. And at one point in his life, he began to see her everywhere. And that was long after she died. And he would see her eyes everywhere. And it became very consoling to him. So, and then Pia Mellody, who I study and respect a lot, she talks about something called love addiction, where we basically make another person our God. But if we don't see the other person as our God, if it's really infatuation and sexual attachment and whatever else is going on there, then that other person is actually not God. That other person is an object. So objectifying people is generally what we do. We turn people into objects. And so I was thinking about that problem that we have. And one of the names of the goddess is Trishna. And Trishna means the thirst and craving after things. So it's interesting that it's one of the names of the goddess, right? It's not the ultimate name, but it's one aspect. You can say it's one aspect of our lives in bodies, is this thirst and craving after objects. So if you think about psychology, and some of us have studied object relations, and this is kind of a current, not real new theory of people's attachments, we start out as babies, and sooner or later we not only are innately attached to the mother, but we get attached to the objects that are related to the mother. The bottle, the blanket, the teddy bear. And they call this object relations because we're expanding our attachment to more and more things and people. So it's like saying that developmentally we objectify as part of this immersion, you can say, in Maya or ignorance or illusion. we objectify our lives, and we make other things an object, and we make people objects too. And those people we're attached to, and then of course the desire comes in. We want to have people do what we want them to do when we want them to do it. And then we get gratifications of certain desires around our object relations. And then of course by that time we're in deep trouble, and and we try to, once we realize we're in deep trouble and we keep repeating these patterns, then we begin to long for the spiritual and some way of liberating ourselves from these repetitive cycles we go through. So I was thinking about this object relations and this built-in the fabric of our lives, at least currently, that we objectify. And even in the Garland of Letters, which I was looking at, I had sort of remotely remembered that in the Garland of Letters is about basically all the Sanskrit letters or sounds that produce the manifest world. So in most of these theories of creation, they talk about the Trinity. And one of the Trinities that John Woodruff or Arthur Avalon, same guy, talks about is sound and apprehension and object or name. So the name is associated with the object. And so objects are sort of built into our lives. And so when we talk about this psychology theory of object relations, we realize that we're sort of programmed to objectify everything, and then everything becomes a thing. It moves away from being a full life process where we're flowing along in this universal flow to this discrete concretization of not just our house and our car, but people. And this is the beginning of a lot of the problems of being attached to another person's body. So I thought it was really interesting finding that quote of Anandamayi Ma's about if you're running after another person's body, then it will ruin your own body. And so she's saying really the remedy for this is to run after God. So it's kind of lovely the way the Vedas and the Upanishads and this tradition in India talks about your Ishta. So if your Ishta is your beloved form of God, then that's the one that sort of aids us in, you can say, focalizing our energy towards God and not, or at least disengaging some with the attachment that we have to other people. And so you remember how Kabir, when he was weaving, he would say attach, detach, attach, detach, because it was detaching from this, I'll say my interpretation, detaching from this concretization of things and people and attaching oneself to God. So it's almost as if we have an aid or a hook attaching, reattaching, attaching to God, and that as we begin to develop away from this attachment to people as things, there's this great mercy that comes in attaching to God. And there it is. And all of these great sages and beings, even the sages that were more jnana, I hope I'm saying that right, even the sages that were more about knowledge, understood that this principle of becoming one-pointed, you can say, towards God, is the one that leads to our liberation. So, and there's another aid, and basically not identify. And we realize we identify with our body and our ego self because of the frictions in the world. We're immediately going to encounter some you can say dissing from another person or rejection from another person, which is a type of practice to experience rejection as a type of yoga allowing us to detach and disidentify with being the doer in the world. So it's interesting how this initial observation about people being in love and how we've all developmentally, most of us, except maybe Sean, as exception, have gone through this kind of serious attachment to relationships. And it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to have relationships, because if we are, we'll be in one, or there'll be one coming along. But the problems that ensue once we get in a relationship are serious and require a really reverent, you can say sacrificial attitude, because there are going to be moments of rejection, and there are going to be moments of where we're required to disidentify with ourselves. And here's this great mercy of being able to call out and supplicate the divine to bolster us and give us the strength to have these experiences which are part of the human condition, until we're more and more liberated. And we're more liberated from our attachments and from our need to manipulate other people and make them do what we want and give us what we want, which goes back to Trishna, which is the attachment and the thirst after things. So we seek things, including people, to satisfy these desires, and we're built that way, and yet we're moving towards liberation through these life experiences, which inevitably are going to lead to loss and disengagement of some form or another. And so it doesn't mean that we're not supposed to love, but I'm remembering a beautiful article by Yogananda, and it was interesting because he spoke to this issue of attachment. I think it was partly because he was attached. He loved his mother, and he probably certainly loved his guru. And one of the things he was saying in this article was, the way he expressed it was, no matter how many holy men and sages howl detach, basically he didn't agree. He said, I want to love everyone with the all-consuming attachment of God. So it's another way of saying that we can be liberated through this all-embracing, you can say merciful love of God, which is in us. And what we're longing for is always in us, but it's very difficult to see it's in us when we're programmed to see outside. We're not the doer. Then we allow the experience of life to create a sacrificial, reverent attitude. So in relationship, if we're truly loving, we're sacrificing this sense of clinging and wanting to manipulate for the higher love to move through us. And that's really what we're wanting most of all.